Hey, Tere, and welcome to Shadows of Thales. I'm glad you found your way here tonight. This little corner where darkness softens, and stories breathe quietly in the background. Before we drift into tonight's tale, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if what you hear truly feels right for you. Your comfort matters more than anything else. If you'd like, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time the night found you. I love seeing how our growing community gathers from so many different places. It's a reminder that even in silence, we're connected. I hope you'll allow this video to accompany you for a while. Every story here is shaped to ease your thoughts, soothe your mind, and guide you gently into the late hours with a touch of mystery and calm. So go ahead, lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, take a slow breath, let the noise of the day melt away. And now, let's step into tonight's story together. The elevator in Karim's building was old, not broken. Exactly. It wasn't dangerous, at least not in the way you'd think. It was just slow. So slow that it forced you into an uncomfortable awareness of the silence. The humming of the motor, the faint creak of the cables. It was a metal box suspended in a concrete shaft. And in those long rides, you really felt it. Karim had lived in this building for 3 years. 12 floors, but only 9 were residential. 1 elevator. And absolutely no surprises. At least, that's what he thought. The night it all changed started like any other. It was late, a Tuesday. Karim had been working on a deadline, fueled by stale coffee and the glow of his monitor. He finally shut his laptop at 1:32 a.m. The apartment was quiet. The city outside was a distant hum. He needed some fresh air, a late-night snack, something to break the monotony. He locked his door and walked down the hall to the elevator. The hallway was empty, but it was a specific kind of empty. The kind that feels intentional, like the world is holding its breath. The silence was heavier than usual. He dismissed it as late-night exhaustion and pressed the call button. The elevator arrived with a familiar groan. The doors slid open with a tired metallic sigh, revealing the dimly lit, wood-paneled interior. Karim stepped inside, the doors closing behind him, shutting him off from the world he knew. He pressed the button for the 7th floor. His floor, the elevator began its ascent. It was smooth, quiet, perfectly normal. The floor indicator numbers lit up one by one as he rose. 1, 2, 3. He leaned against the back wall, scrolling through his phone, not really paying attention. 4, 5, 6. He looked up from his screen, ready for the familiar jolt of the elevator, slowing down. But it didn't. 7 lit up, glowed for a moment, and then went dark as the elevator continued its journey upward. It didn't stop. It didn't even hesitate. Karim frowned, a knot of confusion tightening in his stomach. He straightened up, his thumb jabbing the button for the 7th floor again. Then again, more forcefully this time. The button was lit, but nothing happened. The elevator kept rising. 8. The building only had 9 floors. What was happening? He frantically pressed the door, open button, then the alarm. Silence. The buttons were dead, unresponsive. The elevator wasn't just malfunctioning. It felt like it was ignoring him. Then came the 9. The light for the 9th floor blinked on, and the elevator continued to climb. A strange pressure began to build in Karim's ears, a sensation like ascending a mountain in a fast-moving car. It felt as if the building itself were stretching, being pulled upward into the dark sky, extending beyond its physical limits. He could feel the vibration change, the hum of the motor deepening into something more guttural. His breath caught in his throat. "There is no floor 10, he whispered, the words sounding small and hollow in the confined space. The building didn't have a 10th floor. It just didn't exist. The elevator slowed. The ascent became smoother, almost gently, before coming to a complete stop. And then, the number 10 blinked into existence on the display panel. It was a stark, impossible red, a soft chime, the same chime he heard every day, echoed through the car. The doors began to slide open. Karim's heart hammered against his ribs. He instinctively shrank back, pressing himself into the corner of the elevator, trying to make himself as small as possible. The hallway that was revealed beyond the opening doors was wrong. It had the same basic shape as the hallways in his building, the same dimensions, but it was unfinished. The walls were raw, gray concrete, marked with chalk lines and faded construction notes. Wires dangled from the ceiling where light fixtures should have been. The only illumination came from a few dim, flickering bulbs that cast long dancing shadows down the corridor. The air that drifted into the elevator was stale and musty, carrying the scent of dust. And something else, something that smelled like it had been sealed away for a very, very long time. It was the smell of a tomb. Kareem stood frozen inside the elevator, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. That had to be it. The elevator doors, having been open for a few seconds, began to slide shut. Relief washed over him. Just a glitch. A weird, terrifying glitch. He was going back down. It was going to be okay. But a sound stopped the doors in their tracks. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, a soft, shuffling sound coming from the dark, unfinished hallway. Someone was out there. The sound echoed in the unnerving silence, growing steadily louder. Closer. Karim's blood ran cold. His instincts screamed at him. He lunged forward and slammed his finger on the closed door button, hammering it again and again. Close, 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 he muttered, his voice trembling. But the doors were frozen, stuck halfway open, leaving a gap just wide enough for a person to slip through. The footsteps stopped right outside the elevator. Someone stood there, just beyond the opening. The figure was tall and unnaturally still, a silhouette against the flickering gloom. Their face was completely hidden in shadow, a void where features should be. But Karim could see one detail with horrifying clarity: the faint, pale outline of a smile. A wide, fixed smile that didn't belong in the darkness. "You're early," the figure said. The voice was soft, a low whisper that seemed to slide directly into Karim's ear, bypassing the air between them. Karim shook his head, unable to tear his eyes away from the shadowed smile. His own words came out as a choked gasp. "No. I pressed 7. This is a mistake." The figure seemed to nod, a slow, thoughtful tilt of its head. "You always do." The words made no sense, but they carried a chilling weight of certainty. What did it mean? You always do. The lights inside the elevator flickered violently, plunging him into darkness for a second before sputtering back to a dim orange. In that moment of darkness, Karim felt a sudden, crushing heaviness descend upon him, as if the air itself had solidified, pressing him into place. He couldn't move. He could barely breathe. "What is this floor?" he managed to ask, his voice barely audible. The figure took a single step closer, its form starting to emerge from the deepest shadows. The smile seemed to widen. "This is where the ride ends." And with those final, terrifying words, the elevator doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. Before Karim could even scream, the floor dropped out from under him. The car plummeted. It wasn't the controlled descent of an elevator, it was a free fall. The emergency brakes didn't engage. The sound of rushing wind and screaming cables filled his ears. He was thrown against the ceiling, then the floor, the world a blur of metal and panic. He screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The stop was so abrupt it threw him against the wall. For a moment, there was only silence and the sound of his own ragged breathing. The doors opened again with that same familiar chime. Floor 7. The hallway was perfectly normal. The lights were bright, the walls were clean, the carpet was freshly vacuumed. A couple he recognized from down the hall walked past, engrossed in their conversation, laughing about something on their phone. They didn't even glance at him as he stood there, shaking, covered in a cold sweat, his clothes They didn't see the man who had just fallen from a place that didn't exist. Karim stumbled out of the elevator, his legs feeling like jelly. He leaned against the wall, his heart still trying to beat its way out of his chest. He didn't look back. He ran to his apartment, fumbled with his keys, and slammed the door behind him, locking it, deadbolting it, leaning his back against it as if to keep the entire building at bay. He didn't take the elevator again for weeks. He took the stairs. All 7 flights, every single time. Up and down. His colleagues at work noticed his exhaustion, the dark circles under his eyes. He didn't care. The stairs were safe. The stairs were solid. The stairs didn't go to the 10th floor, but time has a way of dulling even the sharpest edges of fear. Weeks turned into a month. Then, too, the memory began to feel distant, dreamlike. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe it was just a nightmare. An incredibly vivid one. One night, after a particularly grueling day at work, he arrived home late, his body aching, his briefcase feeling like it was filled with bricks. He stared at the staircase, then at the elevator call button. Just once, he thought. I'm too tired. It was just a dream. Careless and exhausted, he pressed the button. He stepped inside the familiar metal box. He pressed 7. The elevator began to rise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He held his breath. The elevator rose past the 6th floor, and then it paused. It hung there, suspended in the shaft between the 6th and 7th floors. The light for 7 was not lit. The car was utterly silent. Karim's blood turned to ice. It was happening again. The number on the display flickered, then changed. 10. The doors did not open this time. The car remained sealed, but the silence was broken by a soft, dry whisper that came from directly behind him. You weren't early this time. The bus was almost empty. It was always like that. After midnight, just a few scattered passengers, most of them half asleep, all moving in a kind of shared silence as the city slowly forgot itself. The world outside the windows was a blur of neon and shadow, streetlights smearing across the glass like watercolor paint. Yara sat near the middle of the bus. She always picked her seat carefully on these late-night rides. She liked having space behind her, a buffer zone against the unknown, so she chose the seat deliberately. No one behind her, a clear aisle to her right. The grimy window to her left. It was her little fortress on wheels. The bus doors hissed shut with a tired sigh, and the engine hummed a low, familiar tune as it pulled away from the curb. Yara leaned her head against the cool glass, letting the vibrations travel through her skull. The city lights were hypnotic, and her eyelids felt heavy. She was just starting to drift, lost in that space between wakefulness and sleep. The first sound came about 10 minutes later. It was a soft shift of fabric, not loud enough to startle her, but just enough to register, to pull her out of her daze. She didn't turn around. People moved, sometimes. It was nothing. She adjusted her own position, pulling her coat tighter around her. Then came the breathing. It was slow, steady, and it was coming from directly behind her. Yara frowned. Her eyes remained fixed on the passing streetlights, but her focus was entirely on the sound. She tried to reason with herself. The bus was old. It was probably the air vents, or some rattle in the engine that sounded like a person breathing. Her imagination was just filling in the quiet, painting monsters in the dark corners of the empty bus. She took a slow breath herself, trying to match its rhythm, to see if it was just her own breathing echoing strangely. But it wasn't. This was separate. She glanced at the reflection in the window. The dark glass acted as a crude mirror, showing the dim interior of the bus. She could see her own pale face, the rows of empty seats stretching behind her. The seat directly behind her was vacant, just worn, faded fabric. Nothing else. She told herself again it was the engine. The air vents? She was tired, that's all. She closed her eyes, hoping that shutting out the world would shut out the sound. But the breathing continued. Inhale. Exhale. It was a patient sound, unhurried, and it felt ... wrong. It didn't belong. At the next stop, the hiss of the doors broke the tension. 2 passengers got on. An older man with a newspaper tucked under his arm made his way to a seat near the front. A young woman in a nurse's uniform stood, gripping the metal pole, her eyes already distant. Neither of them even glanced toward the back. No one sat behind Yara. The bus pulled away from the stop, and the quiet returned. But the breathing shifted. It felt close. She could feel it now. A subtle warmth. A presence leaning forward, as if someone were about to whisper in her ear. The fine hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Her skin prickled. This wasn't her imagination. It couldn't be. Yara's hands tightened around the straps of her bag, her knuckles turning white. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit here. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't turn around. She was too afraid of what she might see, or what she might not see. "Can you please give me some space?" The breathing paused. For one beautiful, terrifying second, there was only the hum of the engine. Yara held her breath, praying it was over. Then it resumed. Slower this time, more intentional. Each breath felt deliberate, measured, as if it was enjoying her fear. The reflection in the window changed. It was only for a split second, a flicker between one streetlight and the next. But she saw it. A shape, a dark outline where no one should be, seated perfectly in the chair behind her. It was a silhouette, a void in the dim light, and its head was tilted, as if it were studying her, watching. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through her. Yara stood up so suddenly that her bag slipped from her lap and hit the floor with a thud. The breathing stopped. The presence vanished. She risked a quick glance over her shoulder. The seat behind her was empty, utterly, undeniably empty. The worn fabric stared back at her, indifferent. She didn't wait. She snatched her bag from the floor and stumbled toward the front of the bus, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She stood near the driver, gripping the pole so tightly her fingers ached. She didn't look back. She could feel the empty seat staring at her. She felt the weight of that one particular seat just behind where she had been. The driver glanced at her in his mirror but said nothing. He'd probably seen it all on the midnight route. A scared young woman was nothing new. Yara got off 3 stops early. The moment the doors hissed open, she practically leaped onto the sidewalk. The street was quiet. Too quiet. The air was cold and bit at her cheeks. The bus pulled away, its red taillights shrinking, fading into the dark until they were just 2 pinpricks of light, and then they were gone. Yara exhaled, a shaky cloud of white in the cold air. She was safe. She was off the bus. It was over. She took 3 steps toward her apartment building, and then she heard it, breathing. It was right behind her, a soft, airy sound in the dead quiet of the street. She froze, every muscle in her body locking up. She slowly, so slowly, turned around. No one was there. The street was empty. A single streetlight above her flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. The sound came again, closer now, patient, persistent. Yara didn't wait. She started walking, fast. Her boots clicked frantically on the pavement. The breathing matched her pace. Step, 4-step. Inhale with her left foot, exhale with her right. It was a monstrous, invisible dance partner. She reached her apartment building and fumbled in her bag for her keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key in the lock. The breathing was right at her ear now, a cold whisper of air against her skin. She could almost feel the phantom weight of a hand on her shoulder. The lock finally clicked. She threw the door open, scrambled inside, and slammed it shut, turning the deadbolt with a loud, final-sounding clank. Silence. She leaned against the cool wood of the door, her whole body shaking. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. There was only the sound of her own ragged breathing, her own frantic heartbeat. She was alone. Was safe. That night, she dreamed of empty buses, endless rows of empty seats under flickering fluorescent lights. But one seat was always occupied. The one directly behind her. She could never see who or what was in it. She only knew it was there. Watching the next morning, after a sleepless night, fueled by coffee and lingering dread, Yara did something she wasn't sure she wanted to do. She went online and searched for news related to her bus route. Her blood ran cold when she found it. An article from a few weeks earlier. There had been an incident. A man had died on that exact route. Late at night, the paramedics found him in his seat. He'd had a heart attack, they said. He died alone on the last bus of the night. He was sitting in the last row. Yara never took the bus again. She walks now, or she pays for a cab. No matter how much it costs, the fear is a price she's willing to pay for peace. But sometimes, when she's alone in a quiet room, or sitting in a movie theater, or even just at her desk at work, she feels it. A subtle shift in the air behind her, a sudden drop in temperature, and she feels someone take the seat right behind her. The mirror never bothered Lena before. It was just a mirror. Rectangular. A little foggy around the edges from years of steam. It hung above the sink in her small apartment bathroom, reflecting the same simple routine. Every single night, wash hands, brush teeth, turn off the light, sleep. It was just a part of the wall. A silent observer to her quiet life. Until one night, everything changed. She checked the time. 3:00 a.m. Lena hadn't meant to wake up. Her eyes had just opened on their own, feeling dry and unfocused. The apartment was completely silent, wrapped in that deep, late-night stillness where even familiar sounds seemed distant and muffled. She lay still for a moment, listening to the hum of the fridge, the creak of the building settling. Then she felt it. A pressure, not a physical one, but a quiet, insistent need to get up. It was a strange pull, a current she couldn't resist. The bathroom light clicked on with a soft, familiar hum. Lena stepped inside, squinting against the sudden brightness. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror, looking exactly as she expected. Tired, pale, her hair slightly tangled from sleep. It was normal. Everything was normal. She leaned closer to the sink, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of her own face. That was when it happened. The reflection blinked. Lena Adante. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs. She stared, unmoving, trying to convince herself she'd imagined Italiano, that it was just a trick of the light, a flicker of her tired eyes. But then, the reflection smiled faintly. Not a wide, obvious smile, just a subtle lift at the corners of its mouth. Just enough to be undeniably there. Lena stumbled back, her hand flying to her own lips. They weren't smiling. The reflection didn't step back with her. It stayed where it was, its faint smile fixed in place. "Stop!" Lena whispered, her voice a small, trembling sound against the cold bathroom tiles. The reflection's lips moved a second later, forming words without making a sound. "You're late!" The silent words hung in the air between them, a chilling promise. Panic seized her. Lena lunged for the switch and plunged the room into darkness. Her heart hammered against her chest as she stood there, breathing fast, listening. The silence was absolute. Nothing happened. After a few agonizing seconds, she let out a shaky, nervous laugh. A dream. It had to be a dream. A waking nightmare brought on by stress. She turned the light back on. The mirror showed her again. Her reflection was perfectly still. Ordinary. Just her. Trembling and pale, but just her. The next night, she was determined to stay awake. She wasn't going to let her mind play tricks on her again. She watched movies. She drank glass after glass of water. She scrolled endlessly on her phone, refusing to even glance at the clock. But resistance was useless. Her eyes opened with a jolt. 3 a.m. exactly. This time, something was different. The bathroom light was already on, casting a pale, cold glow into her bedroom. Lena sat up slowly, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She hadn't turned it on. The mirror waited. She could feel it from her bed, a palpable presence holding its breath, watching her. Against every rational instinct, against every screaming alarm bell in her head, Lena got up and walked toward the bathroom. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if she were wading through thick, invisibly molasses. Her reflection was already there. It was standing closer to the glass than she was, its posture rigid, its eyes focused, alert, expectant. "You shouldn't rush," it mouthed, its expression serious. "You'll need the time." "What are you?" Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. The reflection tilted its head, a slow, curious movement that didn't match her own. "What you'll be." The air in the bathroom grew thick and heavy, damp without any steam. Lena noticed small details she had never seen before. Fine, hair-like cracks spreading across the mirror's surface, like dark veins growing slowly from the edges. The reflection raised its hand. Lena's own hand remained frozen at her side. The glass rippled where its fingers touched it, like the surface of a still pond disturbed by a stone. Lena stumbled back, hitting the doorframe. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm awake. This isn't a dream." The reflection's smile was almost gentle, almost sympathetic. "That's why it works." On the third night, Lena took action. She covered the mirror with a thick, dark towel, taping the corners down with grim determination. She wouldn't look. She wouldn't go to the bathroom. She would stay in bed, eyes wide open, counting her breaths, waiting for the sun to rise. She would beat this for hours. There was only silence. Then, a soft sound broke the stillness, the whisper of fabric sliding against glass. The towel fell. The bathroom lights switched on. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, pulling the blankets up to her chin. She heard the mirror speak without sound, but this time, the words weren't on its lips. They were inside her head. "You look tired." The voice was calm, a cold echo in her mind. "Let me do this tonight." Something cold and smooth touched her wrist. Lena screamed and sat bolt upright. She was in her bed. The apartment was dark. Her heart was racing as she fumbled for her phone. Its screen a blinding light. 3:01 a.m. The bathroom light was off. The mirror was uncovered. Clean. Perfectly still. It was just a mirror again. The next morning, as she got ready for work, Lena noticed something strange. Her toothbrush was wet, sitting in its holder with bristles still damp. The sink was slick with fresh water droplets, as if someone else had already used them. A cold dread washed over her. Each night after that, the lines blurred. The reflection grew more familiar. Its expression started to match hers faster, its movements sinking closer and closer. Sometimes, when Lena would smile at her own reflection, she'd realize with a jolt that the reflection had smiled first, a fraction of a second before she did. It was learning her, becoming her. On the seventh night, Lena didn't wake up at 3 a.m. She was exhausted, finally succumbing to a deep, dreamless sleep. But the mirror did. At exactly 3 a.m., the bathroom light hummed to life. The reflection stepped forward, its eyes clear and bright. Its hand reached out, touching the cold glass. And 'tis time. The glass opened like water. It stepped through. Morning came as usual. Sunlight streamed into the apartment, glinting off the surfaces. Lena stood at the mirror, brushing her teeth. Her movements were smooth, confident, and perfectly natural. A small, self-assured smile played on her lips. But behind the glass, in the dark, silent world within the mirror, something else watched. Something tired, something silent. Trapped, its pale face pressed against the unyielding surface, waiting for the clock to strike 3. Schools aren't supposed to be open at night. Lights off, doors locked. The hallways completely silent. But tonight, the security guard, Hassan, heard voices. He was sure of it. They were coming from the second floor. It was a soft sound at first, a faint murmuring, like a lot of people all whispering at once. Hassan stood perfectly still by the front desk, his heavy flashlight resting against his leg. He knew the building was empty. He had personally checked every room, every closet, every corner. He was the only one here. He took a step toward the main staircase, and the voices stopped whoosh like that. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost unnatural. Hassan hesitated for a moment, then began to climb. Each step seemed to echo far louder than it should have, bouncing off the dark, empty walls. The second-floor hallway was pitch black, a long tunnel of darkness, except for one single detail. Way at the very end, there was a door, room 204, and light was spilling from underneath it. Hassan frowned. That was impossible. That specific classroom, room 204, hadn't had working power for months. The wiring was shot. He walked toward it, his boots making soft, shuffling sounds on the linoleum. As he got closer, the voices returned, but this time they were clearer. He could make them out now. They were children's voices, and they were reciting something together in a rhythmic, chanting unison. He reached the door and placed his hand on the knob. It was cold, not just cool to the touch, but unnaturally, beatingly cold like a piece of ice. Taking a deep breath, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. He braced himself for what he might find, but the classroom was completely empty. Just rows of old wooden desks, their chairs neatly pushed in. The whiteboard at the front was perfectly clean, wiped, spotless. And the lights were off. The room was dark, the only illumination coming from his own flashlight beam sweeping across the desks. But the voices continued. They were all around him now, whispering from every corner of the room. Hassan stepped fully inside, his flashlight beam dancing nervously around the empty space. And that's when the door slammed shut behind him. The sudden bang made him jump, and the sound echoed like a gunshot. The children's voices grew louder, clearer. Presentum, presentum. Present. Each word was spoken by a different child's voice, a ghostly roll call in the darkness. His flashlight flickered once, twice, then Hassan turned in a slow, desperate circle, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no one there. The room was empty. But then he saw it. On the whiteboard, letters were appearing as if being scratched into the surface by an invisible hand. RLL CRL. Roll call. And then a name began to form beneath it. Not a student's name. His name? Abakt Hawaii. Stumbling toward the door he knew was now locked. He fumbled with the knob, but it wouldn't turn. It was stuck fast. As he pulled on it, a soft, scraping sound started behind him. It torned back. The desks were moving. All by themselves, the little wooden chairs scraped softly against the floor, slowly turning to face him. Every single seat in the classroom was turning toward him. Then, one by one, the seats seemed to fill, occupied by unseen students, their invisible weight making the old wood creak. They were all sitting perfectly still. Watching him, a new voice spoke, this one from the front of the room, near the teacher's desk. It was an adult's voice, calm, patient, almost gentle. Please sit. Hassan just shook his head, his throat too tight to speak. No, he finally managed to whisper. The teacher's voice sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. You're late. With that, every desk in the room slammed into its final position with a deafening crash. The sound vibrated through the floor. Hassan rattled the doorknob again, his panic rising. It was useless. He looked back at the whiteboard. The chalk began writing again, absent, absent. The word hung there in the silent room for a long moment. Then, slowly, it was erased, and new letters began to form, present. Present, Hassan felt something press down on his shoulders, a firm, invisible pressure, forcing him down. He struggled against it, but it was impossibly strong. It guided him backward, toward the nearest empty desk, and pushed him down into the chair. His knees buckled, and he landed hard in the seat. The room settled. A heavy quiet fell over the classroom. The invisible students sat waiting. The teacher spoke again, her voice as calm as before. Let's continue where we left off. And in perfect unison, the children's voices responded. Yes, teacher. The next morning, the principal unlocked the school. Everything seemed normal, until he did his rounds and reached the second floor. He found the door to room 204 slightly ajar. Puzzled, he pushed it open, and there was Hassan. He was sitting at one of the student desks in the front row, His posture was perfect. His back was ramrod straight. His hands folded neatly on the desk in front of him. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring straight ahead at the empty whiteboard. The principal called his name. Hassan? Hassan? Are you okay? For a long moment, there was no response. Then, very softly, without turning his head or even blinking, Hassan answered. Present. To this day, room 204 is kept locked. Permanently. The school board says it's due to faulty wiring. A story they stick to, but the students and the janitors know the truth. They whisper about it in the hallways. They say that some nights, if you happen to pass by the old school building late enough, when the whole town is asleep, you can still see a faint light glowing from that one window on the second floor. And if you listen very, very closely, you can hear a class still in session, still learning their lessons, still waiting for a dismissal that will never come. The sign was so small, you could almost miss it. Just a piece of plain paper, taped right beside the elevator buttons. It read, in simple black letters, Floor 6 temporarily closed. That was it. No explanation, no date, no reason. Just a statement. Nur first noticed it on her first night shift at the hospital. She worked the quiet hours, the deep night shifts, dim lights, long, echoing hallways that made sounds even when no one was walking them. She actually preferred it this way. It was peaceful, in a strange, hollow sort of way. At exactly 2:17 a.m., she pressed the call button for the elevator. She needed to grab some supplies from the storage area on the 4th floor. The polished steel doors slid shut, sealing her inside the small, brightly lit box. The floor numbers above the door lit up as the elevator began its ascent. 1, 2, 3. Then it slowed down. Nur frowned. She was sure she had pressed 4, but the number changed. 6. The doors slid open with a soft, mechanical sigh. The hallway beyond was lit, but just barely. The overhead lights flickered softly, as if they were tired, about to give up completely. And the air smelled wrong. It was too clean, sterile, to the point of being unnatural. It felt empty, like a vacuum. A chill ran down Nur's spine, and she instinctively stayed inside the elevator, her hand hovering over the door close button. The doors began to slide shut, but then they stopped, jolting back open. A hospital bed, wheels squeaking softly, rolled past the opening. No one was pushing it. It moved on its own, gliding silently down the corridor before disappearing into the gloom. A curtain on a nearby window shifted, though there was no breeze. And that's when Nur saw it. A figure, standing completely still, at the far end of the hall. It was wearing a standard-issue patient gown, its back to her, just facing the wall. The elevator chimed, a gentle, melodic sound that felt completely out of place in this heavy silence. The doors finally closed. The car descended, carrying her away from that place. Nur stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The moment she got to a staffed floor, she reported the incident. She told them everything, the stop on the 6th floor, the bed, the figure. Mantinus just gave her a tired look. Dayside Floor 6 had been shut down for months after a terrible accident. There was a major power failure. Crucial life support equipment malfunctioned. Several patients were lost. The official story was that the floor was sealed off for repairs and decontamination. No one went up there. Ever. The next night, her shift was even quieter. The silence felt heavier. Around the same time, she found herself needing the elevator again. She pressed the button, stepped inside, and felt a familiar dread as the car began to move. And then it happened again. The elevator slowed. The number changed. 6. This time, when the doors opened, Nur stepped out. She didn't know why. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was the strange pull of a habit she didn't know she was forming. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something drawing her in. The hallway felt longer than it had the night before. The soft hum of the flickering lights seemed to vibrate in her bones. The rooms lined both sides of the hall, And each time, every single door was wide open. Every bed was occupied. Patients lay perfectly still, their eyes wide open, unblinking. All of them were watching her. Their fore bags hung limp and empty. The heart monitors beside their beds were all flatlined, showing no sign of life. And yet, they were breathing. A faint, synchronized, shallow breath that was almost worse than silence. A nurse stood at the central station, her back turned to Nur, sorting through papers that weren't there. Nur's own breath caught in her throat, but she forced herself to move forward, her shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor. The nurse turned around, slowly, her movements stiff and unnatural. Her face was a pale, ashen gray. Her eyes were unfocused, like cloudy glass. "You're covering late tonight," she said, her voice calm, devoid of any emotion. It wasn't a question. Nur took a sharp step back, the illusion of normalcy shattering completely. I shouldn't be here." The gray nurse just nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "No one should." Just as she said it, the lights flickered violently, plunging the hall into near darkness for a second. In that brief moment of shadow, a new sound filled the air, a rustle. The sound of 100 sheets shifting at once. The patients. They began to sit up, all of them, in perfect, horrifying unison. Their heads turned, their empty eyes fixed on her. Nur didn't wait. She ran. She bolted for the elevator, her heart screaming in her chest. The doors were open, waiting for her, too patiently. She slammed her hand against the button for the ground floor. Again and again. The doors began to close, just as pale, grasping hands brushed against the metal edge, trying to slip through the gap. The elevator descended. The number above the door changed, leaving 6 behind. Nur collapsed against the cool metal wall, gasping for air, her body trembling uncontrollably. The next morning, driven by a desperate need for answers, Nur asked security to check the elevator logs. She had to know. The security chief pulled up the records for the entire night. There were no recorded stops on floor 6. Not for her elevator. Not for any elevator. Not that night. Not ever. According to the system, floor 6 didn't exist. But some nights, when the hospital is quiet and the hallways are empty, the main elevator will pause on its journey. The button for the 6th floor will light up on its own, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear the soft chime as the doors open. And from the inside, someone or something presses the button to go down. Thanks for watching. The security office was always quiet after midnight. Too quiet. Too quiet. Just the low hum of monitors and the ticking of a cheap wall clock to remind Adam that time, against all evidence, still moved forward. He worked the night shift at a small, unassuming office complex. 3 floors, an empty parking lot, a world asleep. It was the kind of job where the biggest event was a light bulb burning out. Nothing ever happened. Until tonight, it was 1:48 a.m. when one of the screens flickered. Camera 3. The hallway just outside his own office door. Adam frowned, leaning closer to the monitor. His coffee forgotten. The hallway was empty, bathed in the pale, sterile light of the emergency fixtures. But something was wrong. The image was lagging, who's slightly, but enough to be noticeable. It was a subtle, digital stutter. Curiosity piqued. Adam decided to test it. He stood up and walked to his office door, peering out into the silent corridor. Empty, just as the screen showed. He waved his hand in front of the camera lens, mounted on the wall. Then he walked back to his desk. On the screen, the movement of his hand appeared a full second later. A simple technical glitch, he thought, trying to dismiss the knot forming in his stomach. He lowered his hand in real life. But on the monitor, the image of his hand kept moving. Wabbing slowly disconnected from his own body. Adam's stomach tightened. The air in the room suddenly felt cold. He stared at the screen, his heart starting to thump against his ribs. The delayed image of himself walked back towards the desk and sat down. But as the screen version of Adam settled into the chair, something else came into view. A shape. On the screen, someone was standing behind him, behind the version of him that was now a second in the past. He whipped his head around, his chair screeching on the linoleum. The office was empty, just his desk, his chair. The bank of monitors. Nothing. He was alone. He turned back to the monitor, his breath catching in his throat. The figure remained. It was tall, impossibly still, standing directly behind his chair on the screen. Its form was indistinct, its face a blur of pixels, as if the camera itself refused to focus on it, refused to acknowledge its existence completely. The disconnect was nauseating. He was standing, but on the screen, he was sitting, oblivious, with this thing looming over him. A whisper escaped his lips, barely audible in the silent room. "Hello?" On the screen, the figure's head lifted. The movement was unnaturally smooth, practiced, like an actor hitting their mark. It seemed to look right at the back of Screenadam's head. Adam pushed his real chair back, standing up slowly, his eyes glued to the monitor. On the screen, he didn't move. He remained seated, a ghost, in his own chair. The figure's hand began to move. It rose slowly, deliberately, and reached out. It rested its blurred fingers on the shoulder of the Adam on the screen. A cold dread, sharp as ice, shut down Adam's spine. He backed away from the desk, stumbling over his own feet, his mind screaming. The Adam on the screen stayed seated, unaware. The figure leaned closer to it, its obscured face next to the Screenadam's ear, as if whispering a secret. At that moment, the audio from camera 3 crackled to life. A soft voice, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, slithered through the cheap speaker on his desk. "Don't turn around again." Adam froze, his back pressed against the far wall of the small office. The figure on the screen straightened up. It turned its head, its blurred face moving until it was looking directly into the camera lens, directly at Adam. Then, the blur shifted, twisted, and formed the unmistakable shape of a smile, and the screen went black. Not just camera 3. All of them. Every single monitor died at once. The office lights flickered violently, and then went out, plunging him into absolute darkness. The cheap clock on the wall stopped ticking. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. Adam stood alone in the dark, his breathing ragged, his own heartbeat roaring in his ears. He didn't know how long he stood there, paralyzed by fear. Seconds, minutes. Then, as suddenly as they went out, the monitors powered back on, one by one, bathing the room in their cold, blue glow. Old screens showed empty hallways, the parking lot, the lobby. Everything was normal. The clock on the wall was ticking again. The lights were on. It was as if nothing had happened. He cautiously approached his desk, his legs trembling. Had he imagined it? A waking nightmare brought on by too much caffeine and too little sleep. At the end of his shift, as the first hints of dawn painted the sky, Adam knew he had to check the footage. He needed proof that he wasn't losing his mind. He pulled up the archived recordings, his hands shaking as he navigated the system. Everything looked fine. Hour after hour of silent, empty hallways, until he reached the last file, camera 3. Time stamp, 1:48 a.m. He clicked play, his breath held tight in his chest. The video showed him, Adam, sitting at his desk, but he was just sitting there, still, unmoving, for the entire duration of the clip, and standing right behind him was the figure. It was there the whole time. The figure leaned close to his ear, and it spoke. This time, the audio was perfectly clear, crisp and chilling. "You look better on this side." Adam never worked the night shift again. He quit that morning and never looked back. But sometimes, when you see a security camera lag, when the image stutters for just a second, it's not always a technical issue. Sometimes, it's because something has just crossed over, and it's still adjusting to our side. Thanks for watching. Maya realized her phone was gone halfway up the stairs. It was a simple, mundane moment, the kind that happens 1,000 times. Her hand, almost unconsciously, dipped into her coat pocket. searching for the familiar, cool weight of her device. But this time, it found only fabric. The pocket was empty. Her heart didn't just sink. It plummeted. A sudden, cold drop into the pit of her stomach. She froze for a second, her mind racing, replaying the last few moments. The click of the taxi door. The quick thank you to the driver. The short walk to her apartment building. It must be in the taxi. She spun around, her boots clattering on the concrete steps as she hurried back outside. The night air, previously unnoticed, now felt sharp and cool against her flushed face. She stood at the curb, her eyes scanning the street, desperately searching for the yellow glow of the taxi's taillights. But the street was empty, devoid of life. The car was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the city. Maya stood under the hazy orange glow of a solitary streetlight, her breath coming in short, quick bursts. The world around her was unnervingly quiet. There were no distant headlights approaching, no hum of a far-off engine, just the profound, deep silence of a city asleep. A long sigh escaped her lips, a small white cloud in the chilly air. Defeated, she turned and walked back inside, the heavy lobby door clicking shut behind her. She told herself it was fine. It was just a phone. These things happen. In the morning, she'd call the taxi company. They'd have a record of her trip. Surely, she'd get the driver's information, and he'd have her phone. And if not, she'd simply replace it. It was just an object, a collection of glass and metal and plastic. Replaceable. The photos were backed up. Her contacts were in the cloud. It wasn't the end of the world. She repeated these reassurances to herself, like a mantra, as she climbed the stairs again, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she finally reached her apartment door and fumbled with her keys, a strange vibration buzzed against the wood. It was faint, but unmistakable. Pushing the door open, her eyes were immediately drawn to the small coffee table in the center of her living room. And there it was. Her phone. It sat innocently on the dark wood, exactly where she sometimes left it. Maya froze, her hand still on the doorknob. She stared at it, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. It was undeniably hers. The same faded, blue case. The cementini spiderweb crack on the bottom right corner. A souvenir from a drop a few months ago. But that was impossible. She hadn't brought it inside. She was absolutely certain. She remembered checking her messages in the taxi just before she got out. Her pocket had been empty when she paid the driver. The memory was crystal clear. As she stared, the screen suddenly lit up, casting a pale, ghostly light across the room. A missed call notification. The name on the screen read unknown. The time stamp beneath it sent a new shiver down her spine. 2 minutes ago, exactly the time she was standing outside, panicking on the empty street. Her fingers trembled as she slowly approached the table and picked it up. The phone was warm to the touch. Not just slightly warm, but the distinct warmth of having been recently and actively used. Her heart began to pound against her ribs. With a deep, shaky breath, she unlocked it and checked the call log. There was only one entry. Not an incoming call, but an outgoing one. To her own number, the call she had just missed. A call made from her phone to her phone. Maya didn't sleep much that night. She lay in bed, the phone on her nightstand, watching it as if it were a venomous snake, expecting it to light up or vibrate at any moment, but it remained dark and silent. The next morning, exhausted but determined to find a rational explanation, she called the taxi company. She gave them the time of her ride, the pickup location, the destination. The agent on the other end was polite but unhelpful. They had no record of her ride. No driver had been assigned to that area at that time. No payment had been processed through their system. It was as if the taxi, the driver, the entire journey had never happened. The phone, however, remained. It worked perfectly. She received messages, browsed the internet, scrolled through her photos. Everything was normal, except for one thing. Every night, at exactly 2:14 a.m., Eat made a call. It was always an outgoing call, and it was always to a number listed only as unknown. The first time it happened, it woke her from a shallow sleep. The screen glowed on her nightstand, the call timer ticking upwards into the silent darkness. She watched, mesmerized and terrified, until it disconnected itself after a few minutes. She tried everything to stop it. She turned the phone off, only for it to power itself back on at 2:13 a.m. She removed a SIM card, thinking that would sever its connection to the world, but at 2:14 a.m., the screen lit up, and the impossible call was made, even without a network. It was a ghost in the machine, an inexplicable ritual it was forced to perform. For weeks, this continued. The nightly call became a strange, unsettling part of her routine. She'd lie awake, waiting for it, watching the numbers on her alarm clock tick closer to the dreaded time. But one night, curiosity finally won its long battle against her fear. She decided she had to know. As the clock struck 2:14 a.m. and the phone began its spectral dialing, she picked it up. Her thumb hovered over the red decline button. But then, with a surge of adrenaline, she swiped to answer. She pressed the cold glass to her ear. Silence. A heavy, profound silence that seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. She held her breath, listening. Then, a sound, faint at first, but slowly growing clearer. The low, deep rumble of an engine idling. A familiar sound. The sound of a taxi, waiting. A voice spoke, and it was so calm, so close, it felt like it was whispered directly into her ear, not coming from the phone's speaker. Left something behind. The words were smooth on her. Maya's throat went dry. Her own voice was a hoarse, trembling whisper. "Who is this?" There was a pause, and then she heard a sound that chilled her to the bone. It was the distinct sound of a smile forming in the voice on the other end. "I'm still parked." As the words hung in the air, she noticed something strange. A small, circular patch of condensation had formed on her bedroom window, fogging the glass, as if someone had just breathed against it from the outside. Slowly, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to run, to hide, Maya turned her head towards the window. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, but her eyes looked down towards the dark, empty street below. And there it was, a single yellow taxi, parked directly under her window. Its lights were off. It was almost invisible in the gloom, but one of the back doors was open. A silent, patient invitation. Waiting. As she stared, frozen in disbelief, her phone vibrated violently in her hand. It was another call. Incoming this time. The screen lit up her terrified face. Unknown. Maya didn't answer. With a final convulsive movement, she snatched the phone from her ear and slammed it face down on her nightstand. The ringing was muffled. Then it stopped. She looked back out the window. The street was empty. The taxi was gone. The phone is still on her table. She tried getting rid of it, but it always comes back. She left it on a park bench once, miles from her home. When she got back to her apartment, it was sitting on her kitchen counter. It's part of her life now. A silent, menacing roommate. And every night, at exactly 2:14 a.m., it lights up. It makes its call, and it waits. And some nights, when the silence is too heavy, Maya thinks she can hear the faint, distant rumble of an idling engine. The hotel was quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was restrained. The kind of quiet that feels like it's being held in place by something unseen. Adam's room, 412, was at the very end of the hall. Elekid dat. Fewer footsteps, less noise. Or, so he thought. The first sound came after midnight. A soft thump against the wall. Just once. Then again, it sounded like someone rolling over in bed next door. Nothing to worry about. Adam glanced at the clock. 12:43 a.m. He turned onto his side, pulling the covers up, and closed his eyes. But the sound came again. It felt closer this time. He sat up slowly, his heart starting to beat a little faster. He pressed his ear lightly against the cold wallpaper. He could hear it, breathing. Slow, steady breathing from the other side. The next morning, the bright light of day made his nighttime fears seem foolish. But still, curiosity got the better of him. As he passed the front desk, he stopped. "Excuse me," he said. trying to sound casual. "Is anyone staying in 413? The receptionist, a young woman with a polite smile, tapped a few keys on her computer. She looked up. "No, sir," she said. "That room's been empty all week." A shiver went down. Adam's spine empty. All week. He tried to brush it off. Maybe it was the pipes, or the building settling. Hotels are full of strange noises. He spent the day trying to forget about it, exploring the city, but the thought of returning to room 412 hung over him like a storm cloud. That night, it was worse. The breathing started earlier. Just after 11, it was louder now, more pronounced. And it was accompanied by a new sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like fingernails drumming against a wooden headboard. Adam lay perfectly still in his bed, staring at the shared wall. The sound wasn't stationary. It moved, up, then down, as if something was searching for a way through. His own breathing was ragged. Fear was a tight knot in his stomach. He had to do something. Anything. Gathering his courage, he reached out and knocked on the wall. Just once. A firm, solid rap. The sounds stopped. Instantly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It felt sharp, angry. It was the silence of something that had been interrupted. He didn't sleep much after that. He just lay there, eyes wide open, waiting. Later that night, or maybe early morning, he was jolted from a light, uneasy doze by the sound of a door opening. It wasn't his door. It was next door. Room 413. He heard slow, deliberate footsteps crossed the room. They stopped right at the wall. And then the breathing returned. But this time, it wasn't just on the other side. It was right beside his head. As if the wall wasn't there at all. Adam lunged for the lamp, flooding the room with light. He scrambled out of bed, his back pressed against the opposite wall, and stared. The wall was blank. Unchanged. Just floral wallpaper and a cheap painting of a sailboat. He crossed the room and pressed his palm against it. It was cold. Colder than it should have been. He sat on the edge of his bed, the light on for what felt like hours. He watched the clock. 3:08 a.m. then. 3:09. A knock came. Not on the wall. On is door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Adam froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. A voice whispered through the wood of the door. It was muffled, tired, and impossibly sad. "Can you hear me?" Adam backed away from the door, his mind screaming. What was he supposed to say? What did it want? He found his own voice, a dry, shaky thing. "No," he whispered back. "No." There was a long pause from the other side. The silence stretched. Then the voice whispered again, softer this time, almost relieved. "Good. That was it." He was done. In the morning, as soon as the sun was up, Adam threw his clothes into his bag. He didn't bother to fold them. He just wanted out. He checked out early, avoiding the gaze of the receptionist. As he passed the front desk, he couldn't help but glance down the long, empty hallway toward his room. The door to room 413 was ajar. He couldn't stop himself. He walked back down the hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He pushed the door open. Inside was nothing. No bed, no furniture, not even a carpet. The room was a hollow, empty shell. There was just a wall, the same wall that had been next to his bed. Bare and exposed. That night, in a different hotel, in a different city, Adam lay awake. The room was clean, modern, and blessedly quiet. But he couldn't sleep. He couldn't stop listening. He found himself turning onto his side, facing the wall. Who's to check? Who's to be sure? He hesitated for a long moment. Then, slowly, he pressed his ear to the cool plaster, and he heard the faint, unmistakable sound of someone on the other side doing the exact same thing. Thank you for watching. It was 2:33 a.m. when Rana entered the public restroom. The night outside was an ocean of silence, the city's usual roar reduced to a distant, sleeping hum. The streets, usually teeming with life, were now skeletal and empty, bathed in the sickly orange glow of the streetlight. She pushed open the heavy door, and the air inside hit her cool, sterile, and smelling faintly of disinfectant and damp concrete. The sound of her footsteps echoed off the tiled walls, a solitary rhythm in the cavernous space. Rana preferred it this way. The solitude of these late hours was a strange comfort, a private world she could inhabit for just a few minutes. She glanced around out of habit. The long row of sinks was clean, the mirrors reflecting only her own tired face. The stalls stood in a neat, silent line, their doors all slightly ajar, revealing the empty interiors. Perfect. She was alone. She chose the first stall, the closest to the door, and the latch clicked shut behind her with a sharp, metallic sound. It was the only noise in the quiet room, or so she thought. A moment later, from the far end of the restroom, another sound. A click, soft but unmistakable, the sound of a stall door latching. Rana froze, her hand hovering in the air. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thump against her ribs. That wasn't possible. She had just looked. No one was in here. She was absolutely certain. Her eyes darted to the small gap at the bottom of her stall door. She couldn't see anything but the grimy floor tiles. She held her breath, listening. Silence. The only sound was the low, almost imperceptible buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Maybe it was just the building settling. An old pipe groaning. She tried to dismiss it, her mind searching for a logical explanation. But the feeling of being watched prickled at the back of her neck. A cold, unwelcome sensation. Suddenly, the light directly above the sinks flickered once. A brief, violent stutter that plunged the room into momentary darkness before it snapped back on. Rana's nerves screamed. She finished up as quickly as she could, her movements hurried and clumsy. Her mind was racing. "Get out! Just get out!" She fumbled with the latch. Swinging the stall door open, she strode to the sinks, her eyes scanning the row of stalls behind her in the mirror's reflection. All the doors were still ajar. All of them were empty. Her own reflection stared back, wide-eyed and pale. She was being ridiculous. It was late. She was tired. Her imagination was getting the better of her. She turned on the tap. The rush of water, a welcome noise that broke the oppressive quiet. She washed her hands, scrubbing them with a frantic energy, her gaze still fixed on the mirror. Nothing. Just an empty, sterile bathroom. She was fine. Everything was fine. She dried her hands under the noisy air dryer, the roar momentarily deafening her to the building's subtle hums and creaks. When it stopped, the silence that fell was even heavier than before. She took a deep breath and walked towards the exit, her hand reaching for the cool metal of the door handle. And that's when the lights above the stalls went out. All of them. Instantly. Not a flicker this time, but a sudden, complete, and total plunge into blackness. It was a darkness so absolute, it felt solid. A thick, suffocating blanket that swallowed every shape, every reflection. Rana's breath caught in her throat. A sharp, painful gasp. She snatched her hand back from the door as if it were red-hot. Her heart hammered against her chest. A frantic drumbeat in the void. She took a stumbling step back, her other hand outstretched, trying to find a wall, a landmark in the disorienting pitch black. She couldn't see a thing. It was as if the room had disappeared, leaving her floating in an endless, empty space. Panic began to claw its way up her throat. And then, just as suddenly as they went out, the lights flickered back on. The fluorescent tubes buzzed wind, and then settled into their steady, pale glow. Rana blinked, her eyes adjusting to the abrupt return of light, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Every single stall door was now closed. She stared, her mind refusing to process the image. A second ago, they were all open. Now, they stood like a row of silent sentinels, their gray doors shut tight. But the room was still empty. She could see under the doors. There were no feet, no shadows, nothing. Yet, she felt Italiano. A presence. It was a tangible thing. A pressure in the air that hadn't been there before. It was silent, patient. It was waiting. Her earlier panic returned. A freezing wave that washed over her. She turned back to the exit, her hand shaking as she reached for the handle again. She grabbed it, twisted. It didn't turn. It was locked. Or jammed. She pulled, twisted again, rattling it with all her strength. It wouldn't budge. It was as solid as if it had been welded shut. The air in the room grew heavier, thicker, pressing in on her. The low hum of the building, the one that had been a constant, comforting background noise, seemed to fade, growing distant, as if she were suddenly submerged deep underwater. The world outside was gone. There was only this room, this, and the presence. Then came the whisper. It was soft, a dry, rustling sound that seemed to come from the shadows in the far corner, near the last stall. It was so quiet, she almost thought she'd imagined Italiano. "Don't leave yet!" The voice was barely there, a wisp of sound, but it sliced through the silence like a razor. Rana's entire body went rigid. Her hands, still clutching the unmoving door handle, trembled uncontrollably. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She forced a sound from her own throat, her voice a reedy, terrified whisper. "Who's there?" The only answer was the deep, profound silence. A silence that felt like it was listening. Then movement. Not a person. Not a sound. The stall doors. All at once, they began to slide open. Slowly. Smoothly. Without a single creak. They moved in perfect unison, revealing the empty, white-tiled spaces within. No one. There was no one inside any of them. And yet, the shadows in the room seemed to shift, to deepen. The darkness in the corners felt closer, pooling and stretching towards her. She felt something brush against her bare arm. It was cold. A light, delicate touch, almost like the dragging of fingertips. It was a raw, primal sound of pure terror. She spun around, seeing nothing, and launched herself at the door. She didn't try the handle this time. She slammed her shoulder into it. Once, twice, with all the adrenaline-fueled strength she possessed. The lock gave way with a crack of splintering wood and metal. The door flew open. Behind her, as she stumbled out into the empty hallway, the lights in the restroom flickered wildly, a frantic, strobing pattern that followed her, casting her lurching shadow down the corridor. She didn't look back. She ran, her bare feet slapping against the cold linoleum, the sound echoing in the dead quiet of the building. She slammed the heavy front door to the street behind her and leaned against it, her body shaking, her lungs burning. She looked at her watch. The glowing numbers read 2:35 a.m. It had only been 2 minutes. 2 minutes that had stretched into an eternity. The street was still silent. The world was still asleep. She looked back at the restroom door. It was closed. There was no sound. No flickering lights, only the faint, steady hum of the old fluorescent tubes from within. The bathroom was empty again. The next night, Rana took the long way home, avoiding that street, avoiding that building entirely. She couldn't bring herself to even walk past it, but the fear followed her. Every night after that, she would be sitting in her small apartment, reading a book or watching TV, and the lights would flicker. A single, soft stutter, just once. A quiet, patient reminder. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when she'd get up for a glass of water, she'd hear a click from the other room, a soft sound, like a light switch being flicked, or a door latching shut. It was as if the lights themselves were aware of her, marking her movements, tracking her through her own home. Some nights, when the anxiety became unbearable and sleep was a distant memory, a morbid curiosity would take hold. She would find herself staring at her own bathroom door. She knows she shouldn't. She knows what she might find, or what might find her. But the pull is irresistible. She pushed the door open, her heart pounding, a familiar, frantic rhythm. The light above the mirror will be on, casting its familiar glow. But the light above the shower stall is always off. The air in the small room always feels heavier, charged with awaiting energy, and she knows, with a certainty that chills her to the bone, that it's not broken. It's waiting for her to step inside. Waiting for her to close the door, waiting for the right moment to turn itself on. Because someone, or something, is waiting in the dark for her. And it's very, very patient. The office was quiet. Too quiet. Arwa had stayed late many times, typing reports, answering emails, and listening to the familiar, comforting hum of the air conditioning. But tonight, something felt different. It was just after 1 in the morning, 1:02 a.m. to be exact. A strange sound broke the silence, the soft tapping of keyboards from the rows of empty cubicles. It was slow, steady, methodical. She frowned, confused. No one else worked this late. The security guard, a friendly older man named George, had done his final rounds and left hours ago. She was completely alone, or so she thought. Holding her breath, Arwa slowly got up from her chair and walked down the main aisle, past the dark, silent cubicles. As Semobe, the typing stopped. Abruptly, the only sound was the thumping of her own heart. The monitors ahead of her flickered, their screens shifting from black to a dim blue and back again. She crept closer, peering cautiously over the fabric-covered wall of a desk. A single office chair swiveled slightly, as if someone had just pushed away from the keyboard, but no one was sitting in it. As she watched, the keyboard beneath the monitor typed one single letter. A. Just one. Arwa instinctively stepped back, a chill running down her spine. The moment her foot touched the carpet, the chair stopped moving. The monitor suddenly lit up, casting a pale, eerie glow across the empty desk. An email window opened, and a new message began to draft itself. There was no sender, no recipient. Just words appearing on the screen, one letter at a time, typed slowly, deliberately. You shouldn't be here. Arwa's heart hammered against her ribs. She could barely get the word out. Her voice a small, trembling whisper. Hello, Silanze? There was no reply, just a continued, unnerving click of the keyboard. The message continued. We've been waiting. Pure panic seized her. She had to get out. Now, she spun around and ran towards the main exit. The heavy glass doors that led to the elevator lobby. She fumbled with the handle, pulling frantically, but it was locked solid. Every door she tried, locked. She slammed her hand against the elevator button, again and again. Nothing happened. The light didn't even flicker. She was trapped. Suddenly, the overhead office lights dimmed, plunging her into near darkness, then flared back to life, brighter than before, almost painfully so. In that blinding light, every single monitor in the office flickered on at once. On every screen, dozens of windows opened simultaneously, and in each window, the same image was displayed. A live feed of the very room she was standing in, the same empty office, the same empty chairs, her own terrified reflection staring back at her from 100 screens. Then, the relentless typing stopped. A new sound began, the soft shuffle of footsteps circling around the labyrinth of cubicles just out of her sight. Arwa spun around, her eyes darting into the shadows. Nothing. No one was there. Yet, she felt it. A heavy, intense feeling of being watched. Eyes on her. Patient. Waiting. The office chairs, one by one, begun to turn, swiveling to face her. Their empty seats, like silent, accusing judges. The monitors glowed even brighter, their lights seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy. And then, a voice. It wasn't loud. It was calm, distant, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once, whispering through the computer speakers on every desk. Time to finish your work. That was it. Arwa didn't scream. Say. Just run. She scrambled back towards the glass doors, the ones that had been locked just moments before. This time, they swung open easily. She stumbled into the elevator lobby and jabbed the down button with a shaking finger. Miraculously, the elevator doors slid open immediately, She lunged inside, not daring to look back as the doors closed, sealing her in. The ride down was silent. The lobby was empty and still. She burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath, never once looking back at the dark tower behind her. The next morning, her coworkers arrived to find her already at the office. She was sitting perfectly upright at her desk, typing. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the screen. Her hands moved skillfully across the keyboard, but they were unseeing, detached, a ghost in her own body. She had no memory of leaving the elevator, no memory of the footsteps, or the monitors, or the whispers. But sometimes, late at night, when the building is empty and the city outside is asleep, the computers still type on their own, and in the quiet darkness of the empty office, someone or something still waits patiently for the next shift to begin. The playground was always empty. It had been that way for years. A forgotten corner of the city left to rust and fade. I walked past it every evening on my way home from work, a shortcut that shaved a few precious minutes off my commute. The swings hung silently in the fading light, their chains groaning softly whenever the wind picked up. It was a lonely, desolate place, but I never gave it much thought. It was just a landmark, a part of my daily routine, until that one night, the air was still, unusually so. As I approached, I noticed something odd. One of the swings was moving, not wildly, just a slow, rhythmic back. I stopped in my tracks, my eyes fixed on it. There was no wind. Not a single leaf on the overgrown trees was stirring. And there was definitely no one there. The motion wasn't random, like a leftover push from an earlier time. It was steady, deliberate, as if an invisible hand was gently guiding it. A shiver ran down my spine, but curiosity, a strange and powerful pull, urged me forward. My footsteps were the only sound, crunching on the gravel path. As I got closer, the swing's chain creaked in a rhythm that seemed to match my own frantic heartbeat. It was an old, rusty sound, but there was a pattern to it. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers just inches from the cold metal seat. As I did, the swing moved slightly faster, a teasing, playful arc. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just watching it sway, before I finally turned and hurried home, not daring to look back. The next day, I couldn't get the image out of my head. The memory of that solitary, moving swing haunted me. Was I seeing things? Was it just a trick of the light? My tired mind playing games. I had to know. That night, I went back. The playground was just as I'd always known it, still, silent, and completely empty. All the swings were motionless. I felt a wave of relief, but also a strange tinge of disappointment. I waited, my breath misting in the cool night air. I checked my phone. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m., then 2 a.m. I was about to give up, convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. When it happened, las 2:43 a.m., the exact same swing started moving again. Soft, patient, back and forth, back and forth. It was waiting. I knew it. This time, I didn't get closer. I just watched from the edge of the path. My mind I needed someone else to see this, to confirm I wasn't going crazy. The following night, I convinced my friend, Mark, to come with me. He was skeptical, of course, laughing it off as a spooky story. It's probably just the wind. Lena, he'd said, or kids messing with you. But he agreed to come anyway, more to humor me than anything else. We arrived just before 2:40 a.m. The playground was still. Mark nudged me a smug eye. Told you so. Look on his face. Let's give it a few minutes, I insisted, my voice barely a whisper. And then, right on schedule, it began. Not just one swing this time. All of them. They started moving in unison, faster than before, their rusty chains jingling softly. It was a sound that should have been cheerful, the sound of a playground full of life. But in the dead of night, with no one there, it sounded like laughter. Chilling, ethereal laughter. Mark's smirk vanished. He grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with disbelief. We scanned the entire area. No one else was there. No footprints in the soft dirt. No shadows darting between the equipment, just the motion. The swings moving on their own. That's when I saw it. The ground directly beneath the first swing I'd seen, the leader of this ghostly dance, was wet. I pointed it out to Mark. "Is that dew? Or did it rain earlier?" he asked, his voice shaking. But it hadn't rained in days. We cautiously moved closer, using our phone flashlights to get a better look. It wasn't just a wet patch. It was footprints. Tiny, childlike footprints. They didn't lead to or from the swing. They just circled it, over and over, as if something had been pacing, waiting. I took a step back, a primal fear seizing me, and at that exact moment, the swings stopped. All of them, at once. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise had been. Everything was quiet, utterly still. And then we heard it, a soft higling. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rustle of leaves. It was close, right beside us. Without a second thought, we turned and ran. As we scrambled away, the sound of the swings started up again, faster and more frantic than ever. The rusty chains rattling like 1,000 tiny bones. The laughter followed us, echoing through the empty park. It felt like the playground itself was stretching, the exit getting farther and farther away. The next morning, driven by a morbid need for answers, I went back one last time. In the bright sunlight, the park looked normal again, innocent. The swings were motionless, their seats glinting in the morning sun. But when I approached, I saw them. The small footprints were still there, circling, waiting. I don't take that shortcut home anymore. I take the long way around, even if it means getting home late. But some nights, when sleep won't come, I find myself drawn to my bedroom window, which overlooks the city, and in the distance, I can see the dark silhouette of the abandoned playground. And sometimes, I think I can see it, one swing, moving gently in the darkness, back and forth, as if it's still there, inviting me to come and play. From my bedroom window, I watched the apartment across the street. It had been empty for months. The lights were never on, and the curtains were always drawn tight. But sometimes, late at night, I saw movement. At first, it was subtle. You know, the kind of thing you brush off. Shadows shifting in a way that didn't feel right. Curtains twitching just at the edge of my vision. Then, a light would flash on for a split second, and then off again. It always happened when I wasn't looking directly, making me question if I'd seen it at all. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I was going to stay awake and watch. Really watch. I made a pot of strong coffee and settled into my chair, my eyes glued to the dark window across the way. The hours ticked by. Nothing. I started to feel foolish, like I was just overtired and letting my imagination run wild. Then, at exactly 11:42 p.m., the living room light in that empty apartment flickered on. A figure appeared in silhouette. It was just standing there, perfectly still, watching my window. A cold chill, the kind that starts at the base of your neck and crawls down your spine, washed over me. I instinctively looked away, just for a second, my heart pounding in my chest. When I forced myself to look back, the figure had moved closer to its window. Its posture was calm, almost unnervingly patient. It was waiting. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it. Someone must have finally moved in, right? Maybe they were just quiet people, unpacking late at night. So, on my way out, I stopped by the building manager's office. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did someone finally take apartment 4B across the street?" He just shook his head. "Nope," he said, flipping through his records. "Still vacant. Been that way since the last tenants left in March." My blood ran cold. The apartment was unoccupied. Over the next week, the pattern continued, becoming a terrifying ritual. Every single night, at precisely 11:42 p.m., the light would switch on. The figure would appear. It stood there for a while, and then It started mimicking my movements. It was horrifying. If I raised my hand to rub my tired eyes, its shadowed arm would lift in perfect sync. If I leaned forward for a closer look, it leaned forward too. It was a silent, perfect mirror. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was a prank, a reflection, anything but what it felt like. I started closing my own curtains as soon as the sun went down. I tried going to bed early, putting on headphones with loud music to distract myself, but it didn't matter. Somehow, it always found a way to let me know it was there. Maybe I'd catch its silhouette through a gap in the curtains, or I'd wake up in the middle of the night with an unshakable feeling of being watched. I'd just know. I'd know it was across the street, standing silently in the dark, watching. One evening, driven by a mix of fear and desperation, I decided to try something else. I stood at my window, my hands trembling slightly, and I whispered into the glass, "Who are you?" The air in my room felt thick, heavy. The figure across the street didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, it tilted its head, as if it was considering my question, as if it understood. Then, even more slowly, it raised a hand and gave a small, deliberate wave. I didn't wave back. I just stood there, frozen. A moment later, the figure stepped back from the window, melting into the darkness of the room, and the light went out. For the first time in weeks, it didn't stay until dawn. That was the last straw. I couldn't live like that anymore. The constant feeling of being watched, the paranoia, it was eating me alive. Within a few weeks, I had packed up my entire life and moved apartments. I found a place across town, in a completely different neighborhood, with a completely different view. I thought I had left it all behind. I thought I was free. On my first night in the new place, I was unpacking boxers, feeling a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. I walked over to my new window to look at my new view, my new life, and my heart stopped. The apartment directly across the street, a building I had never seen before in my life, had its lights on, and standing in the window, a familiar figure in silhouette, waiting, watching, patiently. I don't know who or what it is. I don't know what it wants. But I know it's not going away. It's been months now. Some nights, when the world is quiet and still, I swear I can feel its presence so intensely that it feels like it's in the room with me. I swear, it even mimics the rhythm of my own breathing. And I know, silently, that it always will. It was almost midnight, precisely 11:57 p.m., when Rania walked past the ATM. She had no intention of stopping. It was just a routine walk home, the street silent and deserted. But as she passed, the ATM beeped, breaking the quiet. A small piece of paper slid out of the receipt slot. She hesitated for a moment. Then, driven by a flicker of curiosity, she walked over and picked it up. It felt like any other receipt, cool and smooth in her hand. But then she saw the name printed at the top. Rania A., her name. Her heart skipped a beat. Below her name was a transaction, a withdrawal. The timestamp was 11:58 p.m. That was impossible. It was only 11:57. And more importantly, she hadn't used the machine. She hadn't even touched it. A wave of confusion washed over her. She quickly checked her wallet. Her bank card still tucked safely inside. There was no cash that hadn't been there before. The receipt was real, yet the transaction it described was a ghost. She told herself it had to be a glitch, a simple machine error. Shaking her head, she crumpled the paper and tossed it into a nearby bin, trying to forget the strange incident as she hurried home. But the next night, it happened again. The same ATM, the same time. As she approached, another receipt printed itself out, waiting for her. Her name was at the top again. Another transaction, a different amount, always dated for a minute or two into the future, always happening right before she arrived. This wasn't just a glitch. A cold knot of fear began to form in her stomach. Night after night, the routine continued. The ATM would print a receipt with her name, detailing a transaction that never happened. She tried to ignore it, to convince herself it was an elaborate prank. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing night. One evening, determined to understand, she approached the ATM cautiously, her steps slow and measured. The machine hummed its usual low electronic tune. As she got closer, it beeped, and another receipt slid out. Timestamp, 11:59 p.m. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. This time, the transaction was marked as pending. The amount listed was exactly, down to the last cent, her monthly salary. Before she could even process what that meant, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. A bank alert. It read, "Pending withdrawal." She hadn't logged into her account, hadn't authorized anything. Her blood ran cold. As she stared at her phone screen in disbelief, the ATM beeped again. Another piece of paper emerged. She grabbed it. This one was different. Below the transaction details, there was a single, typed word. Hooray! Rania stumbled back, her eyes darting around the empty street. There was no one there, just the cold humming machine, and the glow of the streetlights. Another beep, another receipt. This time, the message was even more chilling. Before midnight? That was all it took. A primal fear took over. She didn't wait for another message. She turned and ran, not stopping until she was safely inside her apartment with the door double locked. She spent the night huddled on her couch, unable to sleep, checking her bank account obsessively. The pending transaction was gone. Her balance was normal. It was as if nothing had happened. But she had the receipts. De Iwer Real. She avoided that street for a week, taking the long way home, her heart pounding every time she thought about the humming machine. But curiosity, or maybe a sense of defiance, eventually got the better of her. She had to know if it was still happening. One night, she decided to check her bank account online from the safety of her home. Just moments before the usual time, the page loaded. Her balance was zero. A gaping, terrifying zero. Her entire savings gone. But there were no transactions listed, no pending withdrawals, no record of anything leaving her account. It was just empty. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a picture message from an unknown number. The image was a photo of the ATM. Another receipt was sliding out. She could just make out the timestamp, 11:57 p.m., and at the top, her name. The message that followed was just 3 words: "Don't be late." Rania never walked down that street after 11 p.m. again. She changed her bank, moved her money, even considered moving to a new apartment. But she knows the machine is still there, waiting, patiently printing its phantom receipts in the dead of night. She can't shake the feeling that it's not just waiting, but watching. And she can't help but wonder what will happen the next time she's late. Because it knows her name, it knows her schedule, and it knows where she lives. The city feels smaller now, the shadows longer, and every beep of a machine, every piece of discarded paper on the sidewalk, makes her jump. She is forever looking over her shoulder, a prisoner to a machine that haunts her from a distance, a constant, silent threat in the heart of the city. The station was nearly empty. It was late, really late, and only a few tired travelers were scattered along the cold, concrete platform. Farah stood waiting for her train, headphones in, trying to block out the chill that seemed to come from the very ground itself. At exactly 2:06 in the morning, the station's loudspeaker crackled to life. A harsh, static-filled sound that made her jump. And then, a name echoed across the platform. Her name! Farah! Please proceed to platform 4. She froze, her blood turning to ice. The train she was waiting for hadn't arrived yet. Looking around, she saw no one at the information desk. No station staff. Just the other silent passengers who didn't seem to have noticed the announcement. Only the echo of her own name bounced off the tiled walls, a ghostly repetition in the dead of night. Confused, Farah pulled out her phone and checked the digital schedule. There were no trains scheduled for platform 4 at this hour. In fact, that platform was supposed to be closed for maintenance. There were no announcements scheduled at all. Right then, the overhead lights on the platform flickered violently, plunging her into a split second of darkness before they buzzed back on. A soft, low hum began to fill the air, a vibration she could feel in her teeth. And then, the voice from the loudspeaker returned. Quieter this time, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. Ferraghe. A primal fear gripped her. This was wrong. All of Italiano. She turned, deciding to leave, to just get out of the station and call a cab. Forget the train, but as she took her first step toward the exit, the announcement blasted again. Much louder this time. Impossible to ignore. Farahe. The train is ready. Her head snapped toward platform 4, and there it was. A single, solitary train carriage sitting silently at the platform where nothing should have been. It was old, antique-looking, with dark, unlit windows that reflected the station lights like vacant eyes, and its doors were wide open, a dark, inviting rectangle. Farah felt her heart pound against her ribs like a drum. She strained her eyes, but she couldn't see anyone inside. It was just a black, empty space. Then, a soft sound, like a drawn-out whisper, drifted from within the carriage. "Come inside. It's your turn." Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run. Run, and don't look back. But her feet wouldn't obey. They felt heavy, disconnected from her mind. Slowly, step by agonizing step, she moved forward, as if she were being pulled by an invisible string. Each footfall echoed loudly in the silent station. Closer and closer she got to the open doors, the strange humming growing louder, the darkness inside seeming to deepen. She stepped over the threshold. The moment she was inside, the world outside, the train seemed to bend and warp. The interior was impossible. It was endless. The rows of velvet seats stretched on and on into the distance, farther than reality should allow, disappearing into a hazy vanishing point. Beside each row, the space between the seats and the wall was a corridor of absolute darkness, a void where no light could penetrate. Panic finally broke through her trance. Farah spun around, trying to get back out, but the doors were gone. Where the opening had been was now a solid wall of metal, seamless and cold to the touch. The train hummed softly, a constant, soothing vibration that was somehow deeply unsettling. She was trapped. She felt a presence nearby, a subtle shift in the air, a fleeting movement in the shadows between the seats just a few rows down. She held her breath, listening, and then a voice, impossibly calm and patient, whispered directly in her ear, as if someone were standing right behind her. "All passengers are here. You belong." Now morning came. The sun streamed into the station, which was once again empty, waiting for the first wave of morning commuters. The mysterious train was gone. There was no trace of Farah, no forgotten scarf, no dropped phone. It was as if she had never been there at all, except for one thing, a single, faint echo that seemed to linger in the air, caught forever on the loudspeaker system. Farah, they say some nights, when the last train has departed and the station is silent and empty, you can still hear it. The crackle of the loudspeaker, followed by a name being called into the darkness. And the local legend warns, if you're there and you hear your name, ... don't answer. Because if you do, the train will arrive, and it will be your turn. The stairwell in Building 7 had been sealed for years. Rusting metal steps, paint peeling from the walls, and a faint, sour smell lingered in the air, as if the place itself had been forgotten and left to decay. But every night, Samir felt an inexplicable pull towards it, a strange fascination he couldn't quite shake. He first stumbled upon it one late evening. The building's elevator was out of service, a common annoyance, so he begrudgingly headed for the service stairs to get to his top-floor apartment. The stairwell door groaned in protest as he pushed it open, a sound like a tired old man waking from a long sleep. Inside was pure darkness. Only the weak, distant glow of a streetlight managed to filter through the layers of grime caked onto the windows. The first step creaked ominously beneath his weight. Then, the second. The sound seemed to echo unnaturally, stretching out longer than it should have, reverberating through the silent space. Samir frowned, a sense of unease starting to crawl up his spine. He was only halfway up the first flight when he felt it. A distinct pressure at the back of his neck. It wasn't the feeling of a person standing there. Not exactly. It was something else. Something patient, almost intelligent. And then, a whisper. so soft he almost missed it, slithered into his ear. "Keep going." He froze, his body rigid. He scanned the darkness, but nothing moved. The only change was that the darkness itself seemed to thicken, pressing in on him from all sides. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the feeling. "I'm just tired," he muttered to himself. "I'm imagining things." He forced himself to continue, quickening his pace until he finally reached his floor. The door slamming shut behind him, leaving the dark stairwell to its silence. But the seed of curiosity had been planted. The next night, it won. Against his better judgment, he found himself standing before that same groaning door. This time, armed with a powerful flashlight, he clicked it on, a bright beam cutting through the oppressive blackness. But the stairwell looked different. It seemed longer than it had the night before. The landing for the top floor looked impossibly far away, a distant point in an endless vertical tunnel. Duke. A step. The creak was immediate, even though he'd barely put any weight on it. He took another creak. Halfway up, he heard it again, but this time it was clearer. The distinct sound of footsteps behind him. They were slow, deliberate, and they were matching his pace, step for step. His heart hammered against his ribs, shining his flashlight down the stairs. There was nothing, just empty, decaying steps descending into the void. He held his breath, listening. A soft sigh echoed from somewhere above him, a sound filled with ancient patience. He slowly turned back, his light beam trembling as it swept upwards. And that's when he saw it. A shape began to materialize in the dim, ambient light. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the eye, a shadow cast by the peeling paint and rusted railings. But then it moved. It was slow, agonizingly patient. Step after step, it began to descend towards him, a silent, dark form detaching itself from the deeper shadows above. Samir's survival instinct kicked in. He ran. He scrambled up the stairs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But the stairwell itself seemed to be fighting him. It twisted unnaturally, the angles becoming sharp and wrong. Steps stretched before him, each one feeling like a monumental effort. Corridors appeared in his peripheral vision, dark openings that he knew weren't there before, leading to nowhere. He finally reached the landing for his floor, his lungs burning. He fumbled for the door handle, his hands slick with sweat. He twisted it, pushed. It was locked. Panic surged through him. The shape was closer now, a silent, encroaching dread. And then the whispers began again. But this time they weren't just in the air. They were inside his head. "You're late. Keep going. Don't stop. Don't." He couldn't breathe. The voice was a part of his own thoughts now, coiling around his mind. His flashlight flickered violently, its beam sputtering into strobe-like flashes of light. The walls seemed to pulse, to breathe. Flakes of rust and old paint rained down from the ceiling like dry, gritty snow. Samir stumbled, his foot catching on a warped step, and he nearly tumbled backward down the seemingly infinite staircase. The presence was right behind him now, pressing against him with an immense, cold weight. It wasn't aggressive, it was just there, patient, waiting, watching. One more step. It whispered directly into his mind. The voice, a calm, chilling command. He had no choice. He forced himself upward, driven by a terror he had never known. Each step was heavier than the last, as if he were wading through thick, invisible molasses. Each step felt like it stretched for a mile. The stairwell elongated, becoming a vertical, infinite prison of rust and decay. Finally, after an eternity, he reached the very top. A heavy metal door leading to the roof. Hope, desperate and fragile, flared in his chest. He threw his shoulder against it. It burst open. He stumbled out into the cool night air. Silence. He collapsed onto the rough surface of the roof, gasping for air, for sanity. He looked around wildly. For a moment, he felt a wave of profound relief. The shape was gone. The whispers had ceased. Was alone. After catching his breath, he cautiously got to his feet. He had to go back down. He turned and peered back into the stairwell, and his blood ran cold. It had changed. The steps leading down from the roof were fresh, untouched, the metal gleaming as if it were brand new. They stretched down, farther than before, pristine and perfect, and from the clean, new darkness below, a single, familiar whisper floated up to him. "See you tomorrow." Samir hasn't taken the stairs since. The elevator is working just fine now, and he thanks his lucky stars for it every single day. Yet, every night, when the lights in the hallway flicker for just a moment as he passes the stairwell door, he hears it. The faint, unmistakable creak of steps. Slow, patient, matching his pace from the other side of the door, waiting for him. Have you ever lived somewhere so quiet it felt wrong? Like the silence itself was a heavy blanket, muffling not just the outside world, but something inside. That's the story of Reem, a young woman who found a room for rent that was advertised as unnaturally quiet. She thought it was just a quirky marketing line, a promise of peace in a noisy city. She couldn't have been more wrong. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of secrets, and full of dreams. Reem moved in on a Tuesday. The first thing she noticed was, of course, the silence. No traffic hum, no neighbor's TV, not even the creak of the old building settling. It was absolute. She unpacked, feeling a strange sense of ease. Finally, a place where she could truly unwind. That first night, she slept more deeply than she had in years. She woke up refreshed, attributing it to the profound quiet. She loved her new room. The second night was the same, blissful, uninterrupted sleep. It was on the third night that the silence began to unravel. She woke up abruptly around 3 a.m. The room was pitch black, the silence as thick as ever, but then she heard it. A whisper so faint she thought she'd imagined it. It sounded like a snippet of a conversation, a single word hanging in the air before vanishing. She sat up, her heart starting to race. Straining her ears, she heard nothing but her own breathing. She told herself it was just the building settling, or a dream she couldn't quite remember. She lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. The quiet now felt watchful, expectant. The next night, it happened again. This time, the sounds were clearer. A woman's soft laughter, followed by the sharp, angry retort of a man. The voices were muffled, as if coming from behind a thick wall, yet they felt intimately close. They were fragments, ghosts of conversations that made no sense. Reem scrambled for the light switch. The moment the bulb flickered on, the sounds stopped. The room was just a room again. Empty, silent. But the feeling of being an intruder, of eavesdropping on something not meant for her, lingered. Over the next week, the nightly performances grew more intense. It was a cacophony of lost moments. The sound of a child running, their small footsteps pattering back and forth across a floor that should have been empty. The clinking of glasses, as if a toast were being made. The heartbreaking sound of someone sobbing, a deep, guttural grief that seemed to seep into the very plaster of the walls. Reem was terrified. She searched for logical explanations. Were the walls just thin? Was she hearing her neighbors? She knocked on their doors, asked them if they'd heard anything. They all looked at her like she was crazy. Their apartments were as quiet as tombs. Desperate, Reem started researching the building's history. What she found turned her fear into pure dread. The apartments, specifically her room, had a dark past. Over the decades, it had been the site of multiple tragedies. A young couple in the 40s, a terrible argument that ended in heartbreak, a lonely old man who passed away in his sleep in the 70s, a family in the 90s whose child had died in a tragic accident. The stories were all different, but they all ended here, in her room. The unnaturally quiet room. Reem realized the truth. The room wasn't just quiet. It was absorbing sound. It was absorbing lives. The room was dreaming. Every night, it replayed its memories, its dreams, made of the echoes of those who had lived and died within its four walls. The whispers, the laughter, the sorrow, they were the room's REM cycle. She wasn't just a tenant. She was a witness to the building's subconscious. The silence wasn't an absence of noise. It was the pause between breaths. She knew she had to leave. She started packing her bags, a frantic energy fueling her movements. She couldn't spend another night in that place. But as she worked, a strange lethargy began to creep over her. Her eyelids felt heavy. Her body ached with a profound, bone-deep weariness she'd never felt before. The room seemed to be getting darker, the corners blurring, even with the lights on. She told herself she just needed to rest for a moment. Just 5 minutes. She lay down on her bed, just for a second. When Reem woke up, it wasn't in her room, or at least, not her room as she knew it. She was floating, weightless, in a swirling gray mist. The whispers were all around her now, no longer muffled by the walls. They were inside her head. She saw flashes of images that weren't hers. A woman's hand, holding a yellowed photograph, a child's red ball rolling under a dusty armchair, a man's face contorted in anger. She was drifting through a dream, but it wasn't her own. She was inside the room's dream. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Panic seized her as she looked down. Below her, where her bed should have been, she saw something impossible. The floorboards were moving. The entire floor was rising and falling, slowly, rhythmically, like a giant chest inhaling and exhaling. The walls around her did the same, pulsing in a slow, steady beat. The room was alive. The room was breathing. The room was sleeping, and then she felt a pressure, a crushing weight from above. She looked up and saw the ceiling descending upon her, not like a collapse, but like a heavy eyelid slowly closing. The gray mist swirled faster, the voices becoming a deafening roar. They were the voices of the lost, the forgotten, the ones who had become part of the dream, and they were welcoming her. Reem realized, with a final, chilling certainty, that the room wasn't just dreaming of its past anymore. It was dreaming of its future. And she was in it. The unnaturally quiet room had found a new voice to add to its collection. As the ceiling pressed down, her own consciousness began to fade, her memories dissolving into the ghostly chorus. The room slept on top of her, absorbing her story, her life, her screams, until all that was left was silence. The next day, a new tenant came to view the apartment. They remarked on how peaceful it felt, how unnaturally quiet. They signed the lease, excited for the deep, uninterrupted sleep they would finally get. They had no idea that every night the room would dream, and that sometimes a new, frightened voice would whisper among the others, a voice that sounded a lot like Reem. It started as a game, a strange little quirk of the old house Regard had moved into, a whisper in the hallway, a laugh in the kitchen, a frustrated sigh in the study. Whatever she said, no matter how quiet, the wall in the living room would repeat it back to her. Just a few seconds later, it wasn't a cold, hollow echo like you'd expect. No, this was different. It was her voice, her exact tone, her inflection, her breathy pauses. It was like listening to a recording of herself, played back on a slight delay. At first, it was unnerving. She'd say, "Hello," and a few moments later, "Hello," would drift back from the living room. A perfect mimicry. She tried to find a rational explanation, an acoustic anomaly, some forgotten piece of tech left by the previous owners. She scoured the house, tapping on walls, checking for hidden speakers, but found nothing. The wall itself was just plaster and old wallpaper, solid and unremarkable. After a few weeks, the fear subsided into a strange kind of acceptance, then amusement. The echo became her companion in the quiet house. She'd tell it jokes and wait for the punchline in her own voice. She'd sing a line from a song, and the wall would complete. The duet, "Time for coffee," she'd announce in the morning, and the wall would agree. Time for coffee. It was her secret. This living, breathing echo. She told no one, fearing they'd think she was losing her mind. She started testing its limits. She'd speak in different languages, whisper complex scientific formulas, recite nonsensical poetry. The wall flawlessly repeated every syllable. It was her perfect, uncanny mirror. It knew her voice better than anyone. But the silence The silence was where the game got interesting. She found that if she stayed quiet, the wall stayed quiet. The house would fall into a deep, listening stillness, as if waiting. The game became about who could stay silent longer. Regard would sit in the armchair across from the wall, holding her breath, a smile playing on her lips. It felt like a contest of wills. Days turned into weeks, and the game became an obsession. She'd spend hours in that room, just not speaking. The silence was a taut string, vibrating with unspoken energy. She felt a presence on the other side of that quiet, an intelligence that was more than just a simple echo. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, she was deep into one of their silent hours had passed. The only sounds were the drumming of rain against the window panes and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Regard felt a smug sense of victory. She had been quiet all day. She had won. She was just about to break the silence, to declare her triumph with a loud aha, when the air grew cold. The familiar delayed echo never came. Instead, a new sound emerged from the wall. A voice. Her voice, but she hadn't spoken a word. It was a low, conspiratorial whisper, filled with a chilling patience she didn't recognize as her own. It said, "Be quiet." Goosebumps erupted on her arms. The voice continued, smooth and self-assured. "It's my turn to talk." Panic seized Regard. This wasn't the game anymore. This was something else entirely. She scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to scream, to run, but her throat was tight with terror. Her own voice, coming from the wall, began to speak again, not echoing her, but originating a conversation. It talked about her day. It said, "I think I'll make some tea now," in a cheerful tone that was utterly grotesque. She backed away, stumbling out of the living room. The voice followed her, not as an echo, but as a constant, running commentary from the heart of the house. It was her voice, narrating her every move. "Oh, looks like we're a bit scared." It chuckled from the direction of the kitchen. "Running up the stairs now, are we?" It called from the landing. She locked herself in the bedroom, pressing her back against the door, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. But there was no escape. The voice was inside the room with her, emanating from the very walls around her. It was her own thoughts, spoken aloud before she could even fully form them. "Maybe I should call for help," she thought, and the voice immediately said, "But who would believe you?" The voice began to talk to itself, a long, meandering monologue. It spoke of Regard's childhood memories, her deepest secrets, her most private fears, all in her own voice, but with a cruel, mocking twist. It was a violation of the most profound kind. Her identity, her very self, was being stolen and paraded around her by the house itself. She spent the night huddled in a corner, listening to the entity that wore her voice as it moved through the house. She heard it humming her favorite tune as it walked down the hall. She heard it sigh contentedly from her favorite reading chair downstairs. It was living her life without her. The next morning, the phone rang. Regard didn't move. She heard the voice, downstairs, answer it. "Hello. Oh, hi, Mom," it chirped, perfectly mimicking Regard's cheerful phone manner. She listened horrified, as it had a complete, convincing conversation with her mother, making plans to visit, laughing at a family joke. The thing in the walls knew everything. When the call ended, the voice said, loud enough for her to hear upstairs, "Well, that was lovely. Now, what to wear today?" Regard heard the sound of her closet door creaking open downstairs. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room sank into her bones. It wasn't just stealing her voice anymore. It was stealing her life. After that day, the house continued to live. Neighbors would see lights on in the evening. They'd hear the faint sound of music, or a laugh carried on the breeze. Sometimes they'd see a figure moving behind the curtains, a silhouette that looked exactly like her car would come and go. Her friends would call, and the cheerful, familiar voice of Regard would answer, making excuses for why she couldn't meet up just yet. So busy with the new house, it would say. The house was active. The house was social. The house was Raghead, but Raggard herself, the woman of flesh and blood, was never seen again. She was simply replaced. A silent prisoner in her own home, Or perhaps something else entirely. No one ever knew. The only thing that remained was the voice, her voice, finally having its turn to talk forever. And as our story fades into the night, I hope the shadows felt gentle and the silence kind. If your eyes are feeling heavy, let them close. Let the echoes of this tale drift quietly away with your thoughts. If you've found comfort here tonight, you're always welcome to return. New stories will be waiting for you just beyond the dark. Feel free to like the video or subscribe if this space brings you peace, but only when it feels right for you. Until next time, rest well, sleep deeply. And remember, even in the quiet darkness, you are never alone.